Zanille always believed her life was perfect. She had a husband, Thabiso, who she thought loved her deeply. They lived in a beautiful house in Nairobi, filled with laughter, love, and plans for the future. Every morning, she made breakfast with a smile, thinking about the baby they hoped to have one day. Friends envied their love, and strangers admired their bond. But what Zanille didn't know was that Thabiso was only pretending. Behind his sweet smile and gentle words, he was hiding something dark. Late at night, when Zanille was asleep, he would text someone else. On weekends, when he said he had work, he was spending time with another woman. He laughed with Zanille during dinner, but in his heart, he had already walked away from their marriage. Zanille didn't see it coming. She trusted him completely. She thought they were a team. But Thabiso had other plans, and none of them included her. He stayed not out of love, but because everything looked better from the outside. To him, Zanille was just part of the image, a piece of the puzzle he needed to keep up appearances. And while she dreamed of growing old together, he was already planning a life without her. A life that would break her heart when she found out. The perfect life Zanille thought she had, was nothing more than a perfect lie. Zanille had only been gone for 3 days. A short business trip to Mombasa. She missed her home, her bed, and of course, her husband, Thabiso. She walked into the house with a small smile, expecting a warm hug, maybe a welcome kiss. But the house felt different. Too quiet. Too cold. As she entered the bedroom, something caught her attention, a strong, sweet perfume. It wasn't hers. It was new, loud, and clung to the pillows like a warning. She frowned and opened the windows, hoping it was just her imagination. But then, in the kitchen, she saw 2 wine glasses in the sink. One still had lipstick on the rim. Her hands froze. Her heart dropped. She hadn't even unpacked yet, but she already knew, something was wrong. Later that night, as she sat quietly on the couch, Thabiso walked in with a woman by his side. A stranger. Dressed confidently, smiling like she owned the place. "This is Nia," Thabiso said, casually, like he was introducing an old friend. "She'll be staying with us for a while." Zanille blinked, confused, hoping it was a joke. But Thabiso didn't even look at her. He poured Nia a glass of wine and made her comfortable on the couch. Zanille sat frozen, the words echoing in her ears. "She'll be staying with us." No conversation. No explanation. No shame. From that moment on, the house didn't feel like home anymore. Nia moved in like she belonged there. Her things filled the bathroom. Her shoes sat by the door. She laughed loudly in the kitchen, wore Zanille's robe without asking, and looked her in the eye with no fear. Thabiso didn't care. In fact, he seemed happier now, lighter, like a weight had been lifted. He didn't hide his affection for Nia. He flirted with her over dinner while Zanille sat across the table in silence, barely able to swallow her food. Zanille wanted to scream. To cry. To ask why. But she said nothing. She simply watched. Watched how Thabiso smiled at Nia, how he treated Zanille like she was invisible. There was no fight, no big argument, just silence and a deep, burning pain that settled in Zanille's chest. Every night, she went to sleep feeling smaller. Every morning, she woke up wondering how her perfect life had become this nightmare. She was still in her own house, still wearing her wedding ring, but she was no longer a wife, just a stranger watching her own life fall apart. Thabiso didn't care. He had made his choice, and he wasn't hiding it. Nia wasn't just a guest. She was something else, something more. And Zanille, heartbroken and confused, had no idea what to do. But even as she sat quietly, pretending not to notice the whispered laughs and stolen touches, a fire slowly began to build inside her. She didn't have a plan yet. But she knew one thing for sure, this was not how her story would end. Not like this. Zaniel's world broke piece by piece, right in front of her eyes. Thabiso was no longer hiding his affair, in fact, he showed it off like it was something to be proud of. He and Nia would sit in the living room, laughing loudly, holding hands, even kissing, all while Zaniel walked past them like she didn't exist. The same man who once promised her forever now looked at her like a stranger. One evening, he looked her dead in the eyes and said, "You're just a wife on paper. That's all." Then he told her to move into the guest room. No emotion. No guilt. Just cold words that crushed her heart. Zaniel stood frozen for a second, then quietly picked up her pillow and walked to the smaller room, the room that now felt like her new cage. Every day after that, life grew harder. Nia mocked her openly. She wore Zaniel's clothes, sprayed her perfume, and left little comments meant to hurt. "Still here? I thought you'd be gone by now," she'd say with a smirk. She acted like the queen of the house, loud, proud, and heartless. And Thabiso? He let it all happen. He didn't defend Zaniel. He didn't even seem to care. He had already replaced her, emotionally and physically. Zaniel became invisible in her own home, walking on eggshells, pretending not to hear the laughter, pretending the pain wasn't eating her alive. But inside, something was changing. At night, when the house was quiet and the walls stopped shaking with their laughter, Zaniel lay in the darkness with her eyes wide open. She didn't cry anymore. She thought. She remembered who she was before all this. A smart woman. A strong woman. She thought about her father, about the things he taught her, never to act out of anger, but always to move with intention. So she stopped reacting. She smiled politely, nodded when needed, and watched everything. Every insult. Every touch. Every lie. Zaniel started leaving the house more often. She dressed better. Held her head higher. She didn't tell Thabiso where she was going, and he never asked. He thought she was weak. Broken. But Zaniel wasn't wasting time. She was making quiet moves. She was speaking to people, gathering information, remembering details about the house, the documents, the things Thabiso had forgotten over the years. She wasn't ready to strike yet, but the plan was forming. Slowly, clearly, powerfully. She didn't want revenge just for the sake of it. She wanted freedom. Respect. Her life back. They thought they had destroyed her. They thought the silence meant she had given up. But they didn't know that Zaniel's silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. Because while Thabiso and Nia were laughing in the sunlight, Zaniel was planning in the shadows. And soon, everything would change. Not with shouting. Not with fights. But with one bold move they would never see coming. While Thabiso and Nia danced around the house, sipping wine and playing lovebirds, Zaniel quietly slipped out one morning without saying a word. She wore a calm face, but inside, her heart was beating fast. She wasn't going to work. She wasn't running from the pain. She was going to see her late father's lawyer, a man who had known her since she was a little girl. Something had been sitting in the back of her mind for days, a quiet memory of her father telling her, "This house will always be yours." At the time, she didn't think much of it. But now, with everything falling apart, those words kept echoing in her heart. When she entered the lawyer's office, the room smelled like old books and polished wood. He welcomed her with a warm smile, but she was too anxious to smile back. "I need to ask about the house," she said quietly. "The one I live in with Thabiso." The lawyer nodded, reached into an old cabinet, and pulled out a thick brown file with her father's name on it. He opened it, flipped through a few pages, then looked up at her and said, "It's yours, Zaniel. Your father left it to you. It's in your name, fully. Has been for years." For a moment, she just stared at him. "Are you sure?" she whispered. He turned the paper around and showed her. Her name, clear as day. Not Thabiso's. Not shared. Just hers. Zaniel felt like the air had changed around her. The world had been dark for so long, but now, there was light. She had something Thabiso didn't expect: power. And not just any power, legal, solid, unshakable power. The house he had been parading his affair in, was hers. The bedroom he kicked her out of, was hers. Every wall, every floor tile, every door, hers. She walked out of that office with her head higher than it had been in weeks. She didn't cry. She didn't scream with joy. She simply smiled to herself. Not a loud smile, but the kind that says, they have no idea what's coming. Back at the house, Thabiso and Nia were busy making plans for the weekend, planning another party, another night of laughter. They didn't even ask where Zaniel had been. They thought she had given up. But she hadn't. She was just getting started. Now, every corner of that house looked different to Zaniel. She looked at the walls and saw strength. She looked at the doors and saw freedom. She watched Thabiso laughing on her couch, drinking wine with Nia, and felt nothing but calm. Because the truth was in her hands now. And soon, everything would change. Zaniel stayed quiet. She didn't say a word about the visit. She let them keep dancing, laughing, mocking. She let them believe they had won. But inside her, something powerful had awakened. The silence was almost over. The next chapter was coming. And this time, Zaniel wouldn't be the one crying, she would be the one watching as everything turned in her favor. And they would never see it coming. It was just past midnight. The house was quiet, except for the soft laughter coming from the master bedroom, Zaniel's old room, now taken over by Thabiso and Nia. They were asleep in her bed, under her roof, still thinking they had won. But they had no idea that while they were busy enjoying their little fantasy, Zaniel had already flipped the script. Earlier that week, she had quietly met with a well-known international property investor. The house was in her name, legally and fully, and she had every right to sell it. No warning. No discussion. Just business. The investor didn't ask many questions. The house was beautiful, in a prime Nairobi location, and he was ready to buy it immediately. Papers were signed. Money was wired. The deal was done. Zaniel was no longer the owner of the house, but she was still in control of how the truth would unfold. She didn't pack much. Just her clothes, some important documents, and a few photos of her late father. Everything else, she left behind. Let them keep the fake luxury, it wasn't hers anymore, and soon, it wouldn't be theirs either. At dawn, she stood quietly at the end of the driveway, dressed neatly, a small bag by her feet. Her heart beat calmly. She watched the moving trucks arrive, followed by a police van and a man in a suit holding an official-looking envelope. The new owner. Right on time. Moments later, loud banging echoed through the house. The front door flew open. Confused shouting followed. Thabiso appeared first, wearing nothing but boxers, his face still half asleep. "What's going on?" he demanded. Then Nia came running behind him, wrapped in a blanket, eyes wide with panic. The man in the suit handed them the eviction notice. The police stepped forward. "This property is no longer yours," the officer said firmly. "You have 30 minutes to gather your things and leave." Thabiso looked around, completely stunned. "What do you mean?" "This is my house," he yelled. But the man shook his head. "It was never yours." "It was hers," he said, pointing to Zaniel, who now stood watching them silently from a distance. For the first time in weeks, Thabiso looked at Zaniel, really looked at her, and realized he had no idea who he had been messing with. Nia burst into tears, yelling and screaming, refusing to move. But it didn't matter. The law was on Zaniel's side now. Zaniel didn't say a word. She didn't gloat. She didn't argue. She simply turned, walked to her waiting car, and got in. As the engine started, she looked into the rearview mirror one last time. The Biso stood in the driveway, barefoot, defeated, holding a box of his things. Nia sat on the curb, crying into her hands. The house behind them, the one they had treated like their kingdom, now belonged to someone else. Zaniel drove away with the keys to her new life in hand, and not a single regret in her heart. The Biso couldn't believe what was happening. One moment, he was living like a king in a house he thought he owned, the next, he was standing barefoot on the driveway, holding a small box with his clothes, watching movers take away furniture that didn't belong to him. His pride shattered. His voice broke as he followed Zaniel to her car, begging her to stop, to forgive him, to fix things. Zaniel, please, let's talk. Don't do this. I made a mistake, he cried, reaching for her. But Zaniel didn't even look at him. Not once. She opened the car door, sat down quietly, and placed the keys beside her. Not just house keys, but keys to her freedom, her peace, her new beginning. Behind the Biso, Nia was screaming at the officers, refusing to believe they were being thrown out. Her voice was high and angry, her words sharp, but no one was listening. She glared at Zaniel like it was all her fault. But Zaniel didn't flinch. She just closed the car door, started the engine, and drove away without a single word. No tears. No goodbye. Just peace. A few days later, Zaniel arrived in Kigali, Rwanda, fresh air, new scenery, and no memories of heartbreak. She moved into a beautiful estate just outside the city, calm and surrounded by nature. The place was quiet, elegant, and fully hers. She didn't waste time crying over the past. Instead, she used her energy to build something new, something meaningful. Using her savings and the business connections she built over the years, she launched a women's startup fund. Her goal was simple: help women who were silenced, underestimated, or betrayed, just like she had been. The fund quickly gained attention. Local women came with ideas, dreams, and broken pieces of hope. Zaniel listened to each one, helped them find their strength, and gave them a place to start again. She saw herself in so many of them. Women who were told they weren't enough, who had their homes taken, their voices stolen. But Zaniel was proof that a woman can lose everything and still rise higher than ever before. Every morning, she woke up to sunlight streaming through her window, not to Nia's mocking or Thabiso's cruelty. She sipped her tea on the balcony, overlooking the hills of Kigali, smiling softly at the peace she had created. She wasn't just healing, she was building. Creating. Leading. Meanwhile, back in Nairobi, Thabiso was crashing on a friend's couch, jobless and lost. Nia had disappeared days after the eviction. No goodbye. No messages. Just gone. Thabiso had nothing left, no house, no love, no future. But Zaniel didn't check on him. She didn't need to. She had let go of that chapter completely. She had learned something powerful: revenge wasn't always loud. Sometimes, it looked like silence, success, and walking away with your head held high. Zaniel didn't destroy Thabiso. He destroyed himself. All she did was set herself free, and never looked back. Months passed, and Zaniel's name was now being spoken in rooms she once only dreamed of. Kigali had become her home, her safe space, her empire. The women's startup fund she created was booming. She was no longer just healing, she was thriving. One morning, as she sat in her sunny home office, sipping tea, an email popped up: "Congratulations, Zaniel, you've been selected for a Forbes Africa feature." She stared at the screen, stunned, then smiled. The girl who was once humiliated in her own house was now being celebrated across the continent. The article came out days later. It told her story, not the heartbreak, but the comeback. It talked about how she rose from betrayal, how she used her pain as power, and how she became a rising tech investor helping other women do the same. But it wasn't just the words that caught fire, it was the photo at the bottom of the page. Danielle, walking into a luxury gala in a stunning red dress, head held high, glowing. And just behind her, barely in focus, stood Thabiso. He was wearing an old mechanic's uniform, standing behind the velvet rope meant to keep people like him out. He looked tired, older, like life had finally humbled him. The photo went viral. People talked. They shared. They clapped. But Danielle said nothing. She didn't have to. Her success spoke louder than any words ever could. She didn't just survive, she won. And the world was finally watching the comeback queen take her crown.